Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight I'm going to try a different angle. I forgot I got another light back here, which might come in handy in making these not so dark. So tonight's episode is sort of one for me. It's one of these episodes where I'm thinking through a theory, and I thought I'd just think out loud. Again, instead of going into my notebooks and writing it all out, which I probably should do, but it takes more time to do that. I'm just going to put it into an episode. And it's a concept I've been mulling over for about a week to 2 weeks, and it's called eating ether. And it really comes down to the notion that because we've had the concept of ether completely removed from our science books, we don't incorporate it into what we do. And I think that's a problem because, it's not a big problem, but it's just one of these things where we're stifled. And we don't think of ourselves as one with the universe, except in metaphysical ways. Now, we're trying to stay healthy, and we're trying to find almost a unified theory for how to stay healthy. And I think that most of you know that when you go back to some sort of paleo diet, you are dealing with the notion that, hey, the earth is made of so many chemicals and so many elements and compounds and all these different things, and we are made from the earth. And so we really just need to get back to the basics of how man initially came to be on this planet. Now, we could have a large debate about whether or not it's creationism, evolution, or alien drop-off, which is a combination of any number of the previous ones. I think what we can say, regardless of any one of those theories, is that we're here. And we've been here for a very long time. A very long time. Way longer than perhaps biblical 5,000-year theories would suggest. Which, for me, is the more ludicrous, closed-minded Christian thing. I don't know if other religions buy that whole thing. But I think we've been here for a long time. I think the records left behind by the Babylonians and the Egyptians alone prove we've been here for a very long time. Very long time. If you go back to this sort of homeopathic Paleo diet, where we're really eating from the earth, we're not eating anything that's processed, anything that's synthesized. It's all natural, all natural, all natural. We don't allow ourselves to consume things that have been genetically modified that would otherwise be the things that we'd want to eat. We don't allow our cows to be messed with, our chickens to be messed with, any livestock we're consuming, none of that gets messed with. And it's pretty obvious that if we control our exposure to things like, man-made radiation, man-made this and that, then we can get back to what we used to be. I think it'd be interesting if we had a blackout that lasted 12 hours in the night at some particular location on Earth, like the big New York blackout, instead of a bunch of, primitives running around looting the entire city. Everyone just relaxed and went to bed and listened to how easy it was. And of course, back then, there wasn't a lot of, there was television and radio. But imagine everything was muted in Los Angeles and all surrounding counties for some reason. Not that I want this to occur, okay? But if it were to occur and we actually had the difference between what it was like to live a day without electricity and then, all emissions are down. Cell phone towers don't work. Nothing works. And we're living in a perfectly balanced world as we did perhaps 200 years ago. How calm would we feel? How many people would dream that had never dreamed before? How many people who dream would dream spectacular things? Maybe dreams would go away for a day. Who knows? But maybe you'd wake up 4 hours later feeling like you had 12 hours of sleep. Because it was that good. Your delta and your beta phases were just as pure as they could possibly be. If we go back to the chemical notion of trying to streamline your diet, back to the founding moments of humanity when it used to be really well balanced. Now, if you go back in history, the way to think about this is that we didn't travel initially. We were raised in a particular area. We spent hundreds, if not thousands of years in a particular region where our tribe was essentially pounding the pavement, trying to, it's a bad analogy because it's a futuristic substance, but, we were harvesting the agriculture in our area. We were eating the livestock in our area. Anyone who couldn't handle those nutrients died off, and so we ended up getting the best of the best. We married our own kind, and so all the geometry of our bodies was very succinct. I imagine we had probably perfect eyesight. A tremendous amount of our diseases, although not fatal, but some of the diseases that can occur when you mix different regions of the worlds together. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do this nowadays because we've got medicine to get around this and we understand it better, but there are consequences for mixing different races together initially, and then we all balance out. And I think we've done this quite a while, so I don't know if we're past this whole thing, if we've gained sicknesses that wouldn't occur if we hadn't moved around. But imagine you leave the valley that you're from, you leave the plains that you're from, the mountains that you're from, the deserts, the rainforest that you're from. And now you are in a different region. You were in maybe a warm climate and you moved to a cold climate. You were in a cold climate and you moved to a warm climate. Well, your body, your skin, everything about that has now been undone. You're no longer resilient necessarily to the elements. You might be constantly cold if you move from warm to cold. You might be constantly hot if you move from cold to hot. But now, this episode is about eating ether. And it really comes down to a very basic principle that we are the amalgamation of God knows how many little orbital ethereal particles that have created essentially the force field that is who we are. The ether itself falls through us just like wind through a sheet hanging in the wind, like a river that never is just there. A river is constantly moving, right? A river is constantly an ocean constantly makes waves, but the wave that just came in will never exist again. But we are more of a solid state being, even though we do have an ecosystem of things that go through mitosis and regeneration. We pass our waste out of our body. We consume things and they melt into our system. And then what we can't use goes out the old ducts, right? Well, now imagine if you were completely living in the higher construct realm of conversation. You're trying to worry about a carrot, some water, some meat, and you're always worried at that top level. That is one end of this conversation. My conversation, for my mind, is going back to the very basics. We are obviously trying to consume things that aren't so violent that our body gets injured, that what we are made out of doesn't get knocked out of place, because we are this house of cards that is the plural of ethereal winds that have figured out a way to orbit each other, to create the force fields. Necessarily, they kind of get together and they coalesce into these spheres. They either have a spin one way or a spin the other way. We typically call one way the positive and one way the negative. Some things are going to attract, some things are going to repel. What's important, I think, that we understand how this works. I've been recently experimenting with the idea of grounding my body. And it has to do with putting your feet on the ground, on Earth's soil. And I'll tell you, it is very powerful, very soothing. And, I can't say something has changed in my body necessarily because I just started doing it maybe a couple months ago. But I'll sit in this yard, that piece of grass right behind me there, depending on where the sun is. I usually try to get in the sun. And I'll take my shoes off. or my sandals on, or my whatever, flip-flops they call them nowadays. Take my flip-flops off, get my feet right on the soil, got my computer in my lap, and I'm working. And I'll notice that the second my feet hit the soil, whatever tension I had on my body starts to melt. I mean, it's like candy. It's like your feet feel amazing the second they hit soil. I don't know if it's exactly the same with sand, because sand is glass, essentially, right? It's a little bit different. I don't know if sand has the grounding properties that dirt has. So I make sure I put it on grass and dirt. So I'm putting it on a carpet of living beings called plants that have their own consciousness, regardless if you realize it or not. They're all communicating with each other in the world. I think beautiful thoughts towards all my plants, and they grow fantastically. I got 3 rose bushes going on me right now. Got a couple plants I put in the ground over there. If any of you see the original intros for 2 and 3, I guess, season 2 and 3, you'll see me film this little potted plant area. And that's blossoming right now. It's awesome. But now I'm thinking, can we understand a little more of the physics of the human body, and especially the nutrients of our body, our consciousness, how our body behaves? I mean, because the thing is imagine this. Let me give you a race car analogy, because this should be a little easier to understand. The first thing you need to do if you're going to put a car in a race is build the car. And the car is going to have so much power, so much horsepower and grip and endurance. Some cars are just built for drag racing. They go 315 miles an hour for a matter of a few seconds, and then they are spent. You got to rebuild the engine. Everything is boiled away inside the engine. And then you have stock cars, and stock cars go in big circles, and they're meant to bang each other up, and they're a little more brutal. Open pipes, different. Then you have like your Formula One cars. Super precise, amazing vehicles. Every single particle of air has been considered. It goes over this thing. From the hybrid engine that's in the thing to, everything is considered. But you have to build that car, and it's just going to be in a garage. You're going to stare at it and go, that's a beautiful car. All right. That's your body. You just have this body, and it's sitting here right now talking to you. But now you want to do a triathlon, a marathon. You want to walk on the beach. You want to ride a bike. You want to stand all day for some reason. Well, now you're going to put that car to the test. Well, now what happens when you race a car around a track? What are the elements that the car designers are considering? They're considering the vector of which this car is going to travel. Is it going to go in a loop? Is it going to go in a straight line? Is it going to go through some organic course that's built on the way Monaco was laid out many, many years ago? Some design track in Dubai, some design track in China is made for racing. Then what is the ground made out of? Is it asphalt? Is it cement? What are the corners made out of? Are they really jagged corners that if you hit them, they're going to start ripping rubber off the tires? How are the tires made? Are they super softs? Are they super hards? What are they? What should we put on these things? How do you configure the gearbox to get the best possible lap times, the best possible straightaways, but you also have enough low gears to get around corners? All these things are considered, right? But vibration is a gigantic consideration with these cars. The engine just on is going to vibrate the car. The car going over certain surfaces is going to shake the car. And so you have to make sure that, was a Formula One race is like, 57 laps or something like that? It's going to have to survive 57 iterations, or 50 plus, let's just put it that way, of iterations through this track of a particular custom type. And so they're trying to consider every element of that. Well, as we ingest food into our system, and oxygen and water, and perhaps even the intangible love and consideration of other people, the social interaction of a human being, all of these things are going to contribute to either our vehicle being injured or perhaps our vehicle becoming stronger. Now, let's say you run a triathlon and then, you do it once a year, but you practice throughout the year when the seasons are right. But now you got to go to work, and you work on the third or fourth floor of a building. You could take the elevator, but the elevator is always full, and you're sort of an athletic person, so you're going to take the stairs every single day. Well, guarantee you, if you practice for a triathlon, those stairs are going to be pretty easy, aren't they? But now think of every single organ in your body and its vital role that it plays in your body. Now, most folks, we get a little bit of education in high school about the digestive system of the human body. And I have to say, for my own sake, I'm very disappointed that for whatever reason, I was not that motivated to pay attention until way into my 20s and 30s to figure out what each organ did, how it works, et cetera, so that you have sort of an intimate knowledge of how your body works as you live your life, because it governs how you're going to treat your body. If they told kids, which they never do, what drinking alcohol does to your body, why do you get high? And then what are the repercussions of that whole process? I'm not sure any kid would ever drink alcohol, especially if you started them off at 4 or 5 years old. When they get in high school, show them all the crash videos where drunk drivers have murdered these families and say, well, this is what you can look forward to if you lose control of this process. Oh, sure, it's built into the society as a way to relax and be intellectual if you know everything about wine or scotches or whiskeys or champagnes or whatever. But if you take it just the slightest bit past moderation, you're going to start becoming a bad statistic in society. And depending on how well you can control yourself on this stuff, or whether or not you build up a dependency on this stuff, your ability to hold a relationship, a marriage together, be a decent parent, is going to be negligible. But they don't tell you that every single time alcohol hits your liver, it kills cells in your liver. Every single time you thin your blood, anything that's relying on the oxygenated blood, and especially the immune system, it's going to suffer. You're not going to be as healthy. I think that's a big deal. Now, of course, we want these things in our lives because life is kind of hard, right? And so to get high a little bit sort of provides a little bit of relief. I'm in that camp. I drink a beer. Every time I eat Indian food, I drink an Indian beer. It's extremely light, and I'm a lightweight anyway, and I'm very proud of that. If I do karaoke at my local joint, I'll have a whiskey on ice. I can only handle one, though, because, man, after one, I got a headache, and I don't feel that great. I can handle one, and I can be okay. If I do a double, that's actually where I start to get the headache. If I drink two, I have lied to myself about how my body works and what it can actually handle. And it's probably because I don't invest a lot of my time in that. But you're eating ether. So at an atomic level, or an ethereal level, which is the subatomic level, we're essentially eating orbital particles that are made of the same stuff that we're made of. But because the orbits that these ethereal particles actually get to be designated anything other than a pure ethereal particle, they must integrate with what we have built our bodies out of, right? They must be assimilated and dismantled. Their spins have to be compatible with the spins that are in our body. Either they can be dismantled by other ethereal orbits, or like the theory of a black hole. And you have to understand, I've done massive research in black holes. So when I say they don't exist, I'm not just being knee-jerky about the situation or reactionary about it. I have written 100-page papers on black holes, okay? But their theory is very interesting because it gives us something that is barely explained in any other fashion other than maybe if you study the way bubbles might combine, or maybe how raindrops might roll down and continue connecting to other raindrops. But the idea of a black hole is that it can only be a magnitude 4 to 12. So 4 times our sun size or 12 times our sun size. Anything below that turns into brown dwarfs and, stationary things that don't turn into black holes. Anything over that will continually explode in sort of a supernova way, and so it can't become a black hole. So the way that they theorize, and again, it's all horse crap, is that you can get a couple black holes together, and because they're already black holes, they can continually combine until they get to be one gigantic black hole. And then, of course, they want to terrorize you with this faux science that, you know, the whole universe is going to get swallowed up by this thing, or the CERN Hadron Collider somehow has the ability to pull that off, which is so ludicrous. I can't even tell you, man. Slamming two protons together by no means will ever affect an ethereal gravitational wave, right? It doesn't create negative pressure at any one point in time. These things can't cave in on each other and become something more dense than what they were. They're shattering these things apart, which is the exact inverse of anything blocking ethereal winds, which would cause the negative pressure to create a gravity wave of some sort. Does it emit a giant disturbance when they bang in these four different colliders? Sure, but it's just like an explosion on a subatomic level. On a subatomic level, people. So the idea is, think about the food that you're eating and everything that you're metabolizing from outer space, which would be essentially anything outside your house or your body, anything out here in the windy area. The unseen frequencies of electricity are bombarding your body. They're vibrational frequencies. Well, if your body's made of a bunch of vibrating orbital ethereal patterns, which are essentially dictating the shape of your body, the shape of your internal organs, every single cell in your body is the amalgamation of probably quadrillions times quadrillions of these things, making up what you are. Luckily, they are very strong in what they do. And so it is difficult to shatter apart a human body with radio waves. But one thing they've done with directed energy weapons is figured out how to project enough energy to be able to dismantle certain levels of anything. Steel, the Hutchison effect, the guy did where he mixed steel and wood together, two things that are completely polar opposites on a nuclear level. But when you go down to an ethereal level, everything is exactly the same. So combining those two things makes complete sense. You're resonating their bonds to be less regimented on a atomic species level. So instead of being oil or being water, you could, for a brief moment, as you're exerting this force on these two substances, theoretically speaking, you could get them to combine. Now, as soon as you remove this sacred geometry of electricity on this object, then it's going to probably pull apart or become a third thing that no one's ever seen before. Now, if you study chemistry in even the lightest way, there are things that are compatible with each other and things that aren't. We have tons of metal alloys, right? Things that are made of other things. And that's how it happens, because they actually are capable of being mixed together. You know, was the Bronze Age? What is it? Copper and tin, I think, is the two to go together to make bronze. I think that's right. But we mix things together to make new things. There are these theories that man lived a lot longer way back in the day, like 800 to 1,000 years. Well, there's a lot of theories as to why that happens. Some of the biblical theories was that, how the oceans came to exist was due to the fact that the ocean was over us in some firmament layer, and that at some point it fell down to the earth, perhaps causing the big flood at some point. I've heard all kinds of wild theories. And it was that layer of water over us that protected us against the emissions of the sun, or whatever the reason was. And it's like, okay, that's nuts, in my opinion. Some of it could be, again, the idea that if you kept with the nutrients and the agriculture and the geographical location in which your tribe formed on this planet, and you never deviated from the food supply. Food was not a matter of entertainment. Food was a matter of eating to satiate that hunger in your stomach. Then perhaps the degradation of our DNA, of our protein patterns, of our chromosome caps, end caps, all that stuff stayed intact, and so we could potentially live a really long time. I don't actually have a giant problem with that personally, that being a potential possibility. But watching today, you see these folks. There's the black gentleman here in America who I think just passed away. I think this guy smoked a cigar every day. He looked great. I mean, I think he was a Navy veteran, but he was definitely military. I think he was Navy, and he looked fantastic. But most people that hit 100 in this world, we don't look so great. Especially our eyeball sockets look really bad. And our eyes start to become dysfunctional. Definitely our sentient sort of awareness is probably 60 to 80% of the people that get to 100. They're not quite all there. But now, what's interesting to me about this topic is as we reintroduce ether back into the lexicon of man, we refute these mathematician physicists that live in absolute paper fiction. We bring it back because, again, Tesla said, look, everything I've ever done is based on how ether works, period. And and again, Mark Twain said that when he went to Tesla's laboratory, all of his machines were powered by electricity, but he couldn't see a single wire going into any of these machines. And one of the other things he said about the laboratory was that the ceiling had no lights up there, but the whole thing had a glowing cloud of light. And he said you really couldn't even see a cloud. It was lit up there. And he goes, there was no light bulbs pointed at the ceiling. It just had this light. And it was like Tesla had a bunch of inventions that he never exhibited anywhere. Perhaps they were dangerous, perhaps difficult to make. Maybe it wasn't economical, so he never even mentioned to anybody how these things work. But these are the amazing things that this gentleman died with, having documented it and having, Donald Trump's uncle, who was I believe the head physicist at MIT and friends of Tesla, actually was hired by the FBI to go grab all the information and sort through it so it could go into the archives. And now we're saying that a man that died almost 80 years ago, 90 years ago, his stuff was so advanced that they're considered matters of national security now. Unbelievable. This is a guy who based everything on ether. And he's like, look, I'm making inventions. I'm making patents. Your boy that said it didn't exist, we got a photoelectric patent. He got through the Nobel Prize thing. He had to get all his money to his ex-wife because she's the one that actually metabolized it out of probably stolen patent somewhere. So I want to bring this material back into the biology of man. I want us to understand that if you really look at ethereal particles, the notion that they sit there and persist in your body, it's possible they could persist in the body. It's possible. When we look at how electricity works, we talk about the valence, the conductive valence on a particular conductive material, like a wire made of copper, made of gold. And the way that they describe it to you is how the cathode technique of going from negative to positive, it's like a chainsaw on the outside of a conductive material. They're swapping electrons like a chainsaw blade around the outside of a valence of a conductive material. Okay, that sounds like they're playing sort of hopscotch with all of the nuclear material / ethereal material that makes up anything that exists in the universe. Now, lucky for us, I think that most of the ether in the universe passes directly through us and never stops by to become anything that we are, because there's so much space between what we are. So we have a lot of stuff that bounces right through us, and probably bounces right through us, and as a dielectric wave off the center of the Earth's plasma core, it eventually bounces back up. A little bit of it will escape back into space, but a lot of it goes into the bowels of the Earth and starts blowing us up like a balloon where you get expanding Earth. I just mentioned in the cancer episode something called cell mimicry. And the first time I ever heard this was from a guy named Green. I think his name was, it's Green. Maybe there's another E at the end of his name, but he was part of this meatpacking company. It was a long-standing company. I believe it's out of Colorado. And They were huge. I mean, I take it they must still exist. If they don't exist, they must have sold themselves off. But he started saying that the notion that we are what we eat is much more intense, and it's on an atomic level / ethereal level, and that it's a piece of science that's been hidden from us so that we don't understand how we become sick and how to remain healthy. But now, why is it that a vitamin can be good for you? The vitamins that we manufacture inside of our body, like vitamin D. Well, you've got this pituitary gland, 2 of them, on both sides of your temple, just inside your skull. You need to have exposure to the sun. What is the sun doing? The sun is a gigantic verb machine. It is shaking the ethereal winds from its surface to us. It doesn't matter where the sun is, that's what it's doing. It shakes it, and it shakes ether through our skull, and then resonates off of the configuration of cells inside the pituitary gland, which then manufactures a chemical we know as vitamin D. That chemical is vital for the entire body to remain healthy. It cannot be taken in a pill form and have any effect on your body. You must get a little bit of sun or some other light that stimulates your head exactly to the frequency that the sun does. And then you'll be healthy. In a way, the sun is helping you eat ether. But it's not considered a food supply. When we talk about the 5 food groups, right? The 5 food groups that were developed, at least in the United States of America, and I don't know exactly when, I would assume it was probably in the 40s, was to make sure that as we grow things in this country, we harvest livestock for meats, we have our vegetables, we have our fruits, all these things they wanted us to consume because they were selling it. They were making it and selling it, and it was the basis of an ecosystem. Remember, the Catholic Church wants you to eat fish on Friday because the Catholic Roman Church had cornered the entire fish market. And so they lied to the people that this is some God ordained thing, that to be in God's good light you had to eat fish, right? The level of which that church lied about everything is just incalculable, right? But that's why they did it. But why is it that one country can nearly sustain itself entirely on fish, and one country can sustain itself on meat, and a small part of some countries can live off of vegetarianism or veganism up to a point, right? They're very docile human beings once they get to that level. But how is this? And then we know that in America, and I can tell you from when I was a kid, my dad was pretty good about making sure I ate the 5 food groups. Like he would say, you have to pick a vegetable, you have to pick a meat, we have to eat these basic things. So he was pretty good with that. But by the time I hit probably 13, 14 years old, even though we still lived together and we would still have these types of meals, I ate crap constantly. And I eat processed cereals, super sugary cereals. I drink Jolt Cola. If you remember that, it's the OG energy drink of the world. It tasted awful. It was like pure caffeine. But now look at people that get addicted to things like methamphetamines. They start to lose all of their body's composure. They get horrible skin. Their teeth crunch away and fall out of their heads. I mean, they look absolutely awful. They get ulcerated all over their body. And of course, if they inject themselves with it, then they get all the holes from needles and that kind of stuff. So we've seen these extreme cases. All of you have probably seen the picture compilations of someone who was beautiful, especially these women, man. I can't speak for the dudes, but the dudes have the same thing. They're handsome, and then they turn into these like zombie versions of themselves, right? And it'll be like their arrest records at the police station. Some of these, there's a notorious one where this woman, I think, was arrested 15 times or something. So they have 15 photographs of this woman going down the tubes. And the very first time you saw her, and there's dozens of these people, they're beautiful. I mean, they're just like, you'd be proud to have that face. And by the time it's over, they'll never have that face again. And it's sad. How interesting would it be if there was a health regimen invented in this world by which we could somehow measure the vibration of food that was good for us, and then measure the vibration of food that is notoriously bad for us. Why is it that pure sugar causes inflammation all over the body? If we could figure these things out because we endorse the science by which we are constructed of, and reintroduce this beautiful theory that explains gravity, explains electricity, and explains all of the mass and energy in the universe, minus the intangible, God particle, which I would call love, right? Not the Higgs boson fictional thing they've invented and then fictionally found. What a joke that thing is. So, what I want this episode to sort of feel like, and this might be a little ludicrous for some of you to consider, but think about any of you that are familiar with the science fiction writer Philip K. Dick. Now, there's a bunch of people like this, but Philip K. Dick took it to a level that was unprecedented. He was able to look into the future and sort of see these dystopian, bizarre-ass worlds, these 1984 worlds, while science fiction was actually a part of that universe. So the Blade Runner movie is, his vision. And again, when Ridley Scott showed him the 20-minute reel that he had cut together to win over Philip K. Dick, who was running around saying, "Don't see this movie, they stole my book," and da-da-da, which wasn't true. He turned to Ridley Scott and he said, "How did you do that?" And Ridley goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "How did you..." Well, first thing he said is, "Can I see it again?" And he watched it all over again. But after it was over, 45 minutes later, he turned to me and goes, "Well, how did you do that?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's exactly the way I saw it in my brain while I was writing it, and you nailed it." I think that's profound. I think that's amazing. That's wonderful. But now think about what I'm talking about here. You know that what I'm talking about, if I'm correct, okay, and again, I trust Tesla 1,000%, and most of you do, then I'm talking about something that may not occur unless we can take this planet over and get these bankers out of here, these corrupt politicians, these corrupt journalists, these corrupt corporations, potentially people that are naive, that participate in our law enforcement or what have you. If we can't get them to step aside and at least endorse the movement and go, "Oh my God, I was just upside down my whole life. I'm sorry. We're going to move forward here. We're going to greenlight zero-point energy systems and all this other stuff." This subject is potentially, 50, 100, 200 years away from being the way that society can operate on a health level. I mentioned this this grounding thing in a previous episode, but I'm going to repeat it here just in case, because potentially drawing in the proper crowd to do this. The gentleman who really did a bunch of research in this has a story, and I have I don't quite have the same history whatsoever, but I can believe his story because I came from Kansas, where you still had completely 100% Native American families. Now, he's probably 20 years older than I am at least, so you go back into probably, I guess, the 50s, maybe even the 40s. And his claim is that he had a best friend that was Native American, and they still had teepees. I don't know if they had houses as well, but they still had a teepee. And he goes, "I would go into the teepee with my friend, and his mother said, 'Take your shoes off. Those will make you sick.'" And how phenomenal is that? Because she understood grounding. She may not have understood the ethereal model of grounding and the electricity of grounding, but she just knew your feet must touch the soil of this planet for you to remain healthy. And his research, because the way he tells the story, because he invented this blanket you can sleep on where you run a cable out your bedroom window, you stick it in the ground, and then the sheet is made of like silver particles and a bunch of other things that are conductive, and so it takes your body conductivity out to the ground, right? But he said that he takes you through all the research that he did and how he asked a bunch of doctors and scientists about the body grounding issue, and they said, "Well, we've never heard of this, so it's probably a bunch of crap." And he explained what he had heard when he was a kid, and they laughed at him. And so he goes, "Well, do you mind helping me prove that this is crazy?" And what they found out was that the overall meridians of the body balanced out beautifully within just 15, 20 minutes of putting your feet on the ground. And that state of being was extremely healthy for the human body. And the number one side effect of doing this regimen was that inflammation went down. It deionizes your body. It takes the overwhelming negative electron charge of your body, and it makes it more, you could say, alkaline. You have as many positives as you have negatives. So you're in a nice, beautiful flow. Your entire nervous system behaves better. But now think about what he's saying and what I said at the beginning of the episode. We didn't have shoes back in the day like we do now. We didn't have paved roads everywhere we go. We didn't live inside houses that had floors. And so we pity all these places around the world when we look back in archaeological digs where they had to live in mud huts and mud ground and all that stuff. But it's really funny that when you were a kid, seriously, if you were 8 years old to 12 years old, especially before the internet and TV and social media gets a hold of you, if your parents would let you build a mud hut in the backyard with the full roof and everything didn't collapse on top of you, you would do it in a heartbeat and you'd love it. That's why we had tree houses, right? Our own little domains. We could pretend we had a fort and we could pretend that you built them out of your cushions in your house and you pretended it's your own little world, right? I mean, I can still remember the euphoria I used to feel when I was a kid. I dated a girl about 5 years ago, had a 9-year-old, and we put the chairs together and build a fort out of every pillow in the whole place, every cushion, and we would watch TV through a hole that we built in the fort. It was awesome, man. You can totally relive those moments in a couple seconds, right? But the whole thing was this ancient past was more holistic to the earth itself because we never lost contact with the earth. And now what do we wear? We wear rubber soles. Rubber soles are obviously insulators against any sort of electrical transfer up to a point, right? We've sort of built these habitats that are, insulators or Faraday cages from the beauty of the earth itself. How many times have you gone into this rut in your life? You're eating a lot of fast food. Even if you buy stuff and bring it home, it's okay, it's good. You get full, you go back to your grind and all that stuff. But then you go over to a friend's house and they are a chef of some sort. And they cut together just a bunch of vegetables. And just a little bit of dressing on it, not too much. Nothing's overcooked, nothing slushy or mushy. And you just ingest this beautiful nature. And you just feel amazing. You feel amazing while you're eating it. It smells good. It tastes good. The variety of taste out of vegetables is phenomenal. And then you go back to your fast food. I'm super guilty of this. This happened to me this year. A friend of mine brought over a salad. And it was amazing. And I'm sitting there going, geez, this probably took her, 15 minutes to make for everybody in the room. And I'm disappointed in myself when it comes to that kind of regimen. I need to put more effort into it. And so even though I tell you that meat is important on this show, I believe that your vegetables are extremely important, especially your cruciferous vegetables, right? There's nothing better than a silky 12 to 16 ounce glass of pureed, GMO-free carrot juice. It is like sex, man. It is heaven to drink this stuff. And to think that it tastes that good and it's that good for you, it's tremendous. And I forgot to give you guys a caution. This is going to be a little off topic and a little graphic, but it's something that I need to tell you guys. If you do get addicted to carrot juice and you're fully healthy or you're fighting cancer or something like that, one of the things that happens when you eat a lot of carrot juice, other than your skin tone can get to an orange, I don't know how much you have to drink to get that Steve Jobs thing to happen to you, but your stool will definitely get a little weird. It's the only thing I can tell you is clay. That's what I can tell you, and it's not like anything you've ever passed before. So if you do ingest a tremendous amount of it, you can expect your stool to be a little more effort. Let's just put it that way, on all levels, okay? So Fair warning has now been distributed. But ever since this whole thing has been reintroduced to me, this ether thing through Eric Dollard, God bless that man, who essentially dug up all the old texts, all the old books, and reread them to us, and then he compared it to modern day science, and he said, look how much we've been duped. I can't stop thinking about ether all the time, and I have to say, I repeat and repeat and repeat on this show that when you think the truth and you start digesting concepts of truth, you have this amazing, beautiful wind of God. I mean, I can only describe it as the Christians describe the Holy Spirit going through your body. I am reinterpreting my entire reality as ethereal particles. Except that now, through doing this show and having tremendous lectures over and over and over again, I mean tremendously long lectures, right? Where I do distinguish the soul from the body. That's a big thing. I do envision a life force that's separate from the ether. But the other thing that I recognize is that to the degree my body is healthy with its ethereal patterns in place, with it being fully functional the way that it was intended as it was designed, every organ in my body, okay, I see the spirit of this universe going through me much more efficiently. I think my creativity is boosted. I think my happiness is boosted. My whole EQ or EI number, right? My emotional intelligence is growing and growing and growing every day, and it's higher than it's ever been, in my opinion. And I have that episode that's coming here, which will be out before this one comes out. But if you think about self-awareness, self-management, motivational control, your empathy towards other people, it's all in there. And I fear that through either serendipity, which means by pure accident, the individuals that want to be completely in control and make sure that we don't have control know this and thus feed us crap. I love this statement that I've heard a lot lately, which is that we could fix this entire planet in a matter of months if we just had these evil people removed from power. But they don't have any more say. I just marathoned the Twilight Zone again the other night, not the whole thing, but I marathoned probably about 12 to 15 episodes recently, and there was this episode, and I forget its name, but it's all about a guy that has owned this company. His family's owned this company for a long time, and he is now getting into electronics. I mean, man, this was a prophecy if there ever was one. And he talked about the idea that, the whole thing starts off where he's buying these new machines, these new computers to replace people in the factory. Now, the funny thing is that it was, that the studios were not able to have special effects do all the things that he was saying. So they were basically putting like a computer in a room and saying that it was taking care of manufacturing, but you never saw a robotic arm do anything. So a little bit of suspension of disbelief in there. But this guy was he was the descendant of his father and his grandfather who had the company. He was talking to an old man that was hired probably by his father. And he just kept getting rid of employees, and he was so happy. He kept talking about, this is progress, and if you're not for progress, then you're stupid, and you deserve to be, knocked out. But meanwhile, he's removing the humanity from the product. And the old man's looking at him, and he's just getting more and more pissed off at this guy. And so eventually the guy, he says, this last machine I've installed is the last machine that we're going to buy, and it's the one that replaces you. But he goes, I'm going to give you a giant severance package and a great, retirement package, so you'll be just fine. And a guy smacks him across the face. And he says, you keep your money. And he says, what you don't understand is you're removing what man needs, which is a good, hard day's work, which is what our president now keeps talking about. You got to go back to some trade skills. They're the most fun in the whole world, whether you're programming a website or building a car or doing landscaping or painting the side of a house or doing whatever the hell you're doing. You can clean a house and it's fantastic, right? You feel good. You did something at the end of the day. As long as you can get a living wage, which is something we need to work on, we'll be all right. And so the guy ends up, the old man who dislikes this guy ends up drinking in the bar across the street. And the way they end the episode is that eventually this jerk-off who was firing everybody and replacing everybody with machines wanders across the street, and he's totally disheveled. You can see he hasn't shaved in a couple days, kind of like me right now. And his suit's all undone, and he comes in there, and he's just a broken man. And he sits at the end of the bar. And, of course, he looks over at the old man. He's like, ooh, looks like somebody else got replaced, right? And the guy would always spin his watch on the fob. That was his caricature move. And so he comes across the bar, and he's over to the bar, and he says, you know what happened to me, man? You wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe what happened to me. He goes, the board of directors voted, and they replaced me. They replaced me with something, with an electronic thing. And he sees what the old man was saying. He had one of his employees get real disgruntled and break one of the computers, and of course he got his in the end. He was Faust. He signed the deal with the devil and got his own. And when they go back over to his office, the funny thing is that the office had Robbie the Robot in there. They had dug that up, and he was spinning the fob. It's really funny. So, this subject is something I think that will grow over time if we can get science rediscovered. I would be interested in any of you, because I know all of you are busy, and I haven't really had a listener approach me with anything related to ether and saying, man, me too, and I'm researching this, that, and the other thing. And of all the listeners, no one's ever come to me with that sort of opinion about things. So I sort of feel very isolated in this particular regiment. But, I can't stop my brain. I'm going to continue thinking about everything until I can come up with some better epiphanies. I did just watch a documentary, a really short one today, on the YouTubes at my lounge, where they were talking about how they are, it was the entire evolution of aviation as it related to the actual compensation for vibrational winds that go over wings, because they had built planes with a particular level of sturdiness, and as they kept flying them faster and faster, there was a point where planes were shattering because the wings would start vibrating so intensely, and once it started going, the faster that you went, it would just explode. And they showed some videos of this stuff. It's pretty powerful. But I think about that for the human body, drinking things that are really agitated. There's the thing I told you about, and it's always been a mystery to me. It's been a really weird thing that I was over at this woman's house, and she was 60 years old. She had grown up in sort of the upper class, or at least medium upper class world. So old money, lots of it. She married into a family that was, they got matchmaked to another guy. And her family was weird, Her family was actually one of these nudist families, really strange. She was the woman that said she thought her father's testicles were beautiful. It's like, holy hell. I hope that's an artistic statement. But I'm at her place for lunch. She's feeding me for lunch, and she basically fed me I think it was ricotta cheese and tomatoes, and that was the whole thing. And I'm sitting there looking at this lady like, I'm going to be hungry after I get done eating all this, just so you know. But anyway, she served me room temperature water. And I said, oh. And, it was okay. I didn't say anything. But she mentioned about this whole thing about not drinking cold water. And this woman had never consumed a soda in her entire life, which I thought was pretty wild, right? But what was interesting, it was a glimpse into the regiments of families like this that had this sort of coveted knowledge that's very simple. It was a less is more formula. And so I thought, why would that be? So I've looked it up several times online, what's the deal with drinking cold water, and it has to do with shocking the organs in the body. And when you think about the whole idea of eating ether, you have movement in all particles, and if you were to drink cold substances, which we're addicted to, at least in the United States of America, you have a contradictory movement of the particles that you're ingesting versus the 98.8 temperature that's inside your body. And so my other question that immediately pops up is the opposite polarity. Do these people drink hot coffee? Wouldn't that be just the same? Because if the body's 98.8 and, really hot water out of a faucet in your house usually ranges from about 110 degrees to about 115, maybe 120 tops if you really want to get first degree burns. And so I don't know what coffee is. I don't know how hot that stuff is, but man, I've had some hot ass coffee in my lifetime. But what do? We're cold in the wintertime, and so we consume a warm substance, or we consume an alcohol because it sort of numbs our body to its temperature. I got heavily into watching people consume hot peppers until I got some of my own. And it's a rush, man. You eat a hot pepper, and I think the hottest thing I ever really got to the point I could eat without dying was a habanero. I could just put it in my mouth and chew it up, and it's hot, and you have a little bit of a rush. I've got a nuclear candy bar in my refrigerator that I nibble on every once in a while, which is full of Trinidad Scorpion and Carolina Reaper in it. It's this delicious chocolate, man. It's like this dark chocolate. It's amazing, but man, you can only ingest like a tiny bit of this stuff unless you're a pepperhead. But spices have been known to shake apart other bacteria in your body, so it's sort of an antibiotic. So hot peppers were a medicine back in the day, before we had other methods of doing it. We have foods like honey. Honey is the most natural antibiotic that the world creates. You can take it with you on a trip to, out in the woods when you're camping and that kind of stuff. Just make sure you have it and you can apply it to your food to make it taste better. But if someone's crawling through some stream and cuts their leg, instead of getting gangrene, you just pack it full of honey. And they showed this in the movie Gladiator, when Russell Crowe's character had a gash in his arm, I think, and this African guy was chewing up this compound of root and a bunch of other stuff, and he stuffed it in the wound and he sealed it up. And it just prevents anything from growing in that area of the body. The Babylonians used it. The Egyptians used it. I mean, it's as old as the history books, man. So the thing is this. You all know this from other doctrines that you adopt in your life. When it's from nature, it's good for you. When it's synthesized and processed, it's bad for you. If it's really, really old, it's bad for you. When it's really fresh, it's good for you, right? Anyway, it's starting to sprinkler. I need to get out of here. Hope you feel me. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. All the links are there. Audio, video, lock Facebook group, Twitter, Patreon, PayPal. Take care of yourself and someone else. And I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.